Welcome to Business Talk here on businesstech.co.za. I'm Michael Avery, and it's obviously been a long year for everyone. Today, we're tackling one of those words that I think when we look at PowerPoint speak, we love to abuse it almost as much as the word synergy, resilience. But in the South African context, it's so important to think about resilience. And most companies, I think, resilience, when they think of it, means having a backup generator or maybe an Excel sheet under a drawer somewhere called Plan B. But our guest today knows it's far deeper than that. Willem Olivier is CEO of Resilience Innovations, and he spent the better part of 2 decades turning all of that corporate chaos into structured recovery, from data centers and disaster recovery to, well, surviving actual disasters from floods. Willem led the management buyout that created Resilience Innovations from Data's continuity practice, as viewers of the show will know, a regular. And since then, he's been helping South African businesses ensure that when the lights go out, literally and figuratively, the show still goes on. Willem, great to have you back on Business Talk and to talk about this issue of resilience. And it does feel like every time we chat, the world has found a new way to test what the word resilience actually means, because there have been many crises this year. You've said that true resilience doesn't, though, start with systems or backups or generators that I mentioned. It starts with people. It's a fascinating inversion of the usual technology-first approach. What do you mean by that? And how have you seen that play out in real organizations?
Good morning, Marva. Yes, and thank you very much for hosting me again. Great to be back. In terms of people being the core to ensuring that a business can recover, we've seen this often where people that have to come through for testing, for instance, at our recovery facilities and so forth. These are quite important things that if you don't test these things, you won't necessarily will recover it. But this is not just from a technology perspective, but from a people perspective, on a personal level, is from your home. How do you deal with things that during COVID, for instance, we were all thrown into our homes and we had to learn Teams very quickly, and then load shedding started to take place as well, and people didn't have battery backups, and all of a sudden companies had to start buying UPSs for their staff at home. So that typically is what happens with people is how do you build your own personal resilience? So on a day-to-day basis, you have challenges as a human being that sometimes goes far beyond what you expect, because we get thrown with all these things that happen to us in our lives. And it may be a massive traffic jam. You've got important deliverables in your office. How do you deal with those things at that specific point in time? So it's from going from a crisis to dealing with these crises, and to making sure that you can deliver what you have to deliver. But if you take a look at your own personal life, for instance, if you have a major impact water outage that we've seen now recently, quite a lot of that, where people do not have water in their homes for 2 weeks or 3 weeks at a time, is what you do. Because it's easy to live without electricity, but to live without water, that's very, very difficult. So that's where people's resilience gets built. It's nice to live in a first world country where everything is given to you and it works. But, in our environment, it's not always the case. So personally, I think it's people have to learn how to deal with things in life, the challenges that are thrown to you. And ultimately, you build your own resilience without even knowing it.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I was listening to Franz Cronier, previously of the Institute of Race Relations, and then the CRA, and he's also got a new podcast out, which is very thought-provoking. But he says the one thing that makes him positive about South Africa is the fact that we're developing this resilience against state failure, this bulwark against state failure. And where you see energy fail, well, we've seen record rooftop solar installed, and private power is now a thing, and at a corporate level, wheeling. And similarly, we're starting to see that kind of mindset to water, people installing boreholes and JoJo tanks. So this idea of resilience, I think, is very much a South African thing as well, because of the context in which we operate in. How important is leadership from the top, though, when that crisis hits? Because it's leadership that often sets the tone for whether a company bounces back or breaks down. And in your experience, how does that mindset at the top influence the actual recovery process?
Well, it's actually a very good question. I can, from experience and what I've seen over the last 25 years, leadership is absolutely critical in a crisis, or even in an emergency for that matter. If say there's an emergency inside the building has to be evacuated. Leadership has to stand out, where people can take their stance, stand up and guide their staff through a incident or a crisis or an emergency. And if it's not for strong leadership, the chances are that you possibly will fail is quite good, because ultimately having a strong leader during a crisis is the right way to deal with these things. But you would think that, say for instance, the chief operating officer is the right person to deal with an operational crisis because he's the COO. It's not always the case. It may be the chief financial officer that stands out as a person that can deal with a crisis much better than what that COO can deal with. And I've seen these things happen in real life, especially when we do crisis simulations. So testing that leadership skill during a crisis in a simulation, I would say, is absolutely critical to test that, to make sure that you select the right people. And it doesn't always have to be the CEO or COO that's got to be now the leader of dealing with a crisis. You need a crisis commander, call it that if you want to.
Yeah, well, and that's it's such an important thing that you raised there around running a simulation, because I think sometimes you may feel it is a particular individual, but then when the pressure starts to bear down on people, that's when you really reveal who handles that crisis pressure best. Because it's one thing to have a crisis manual, it's another thing entirely when the CEO is the one panicking. That just sends panic throughout the organization. Now, I know you've worked in some truly challenging environments across Africa. Can you share a story or an example where this kind of human resilience made the crucial difference between failure and recovery?
Yeah, I must say, I've seen quite a number of these things happen in Africa, working in about 16 countries in Africa. But the one that really stands out for me was in 2004, in the tsunami that took place, where the tsunami actually went through all the way Seychelles, Mauritius, and I worked for a bank at that stage. And it was also, we got hit in Kenya, Tanzania, Mozambique, Mauritius, and Seychelles. But the event that stands out for me is in Seychelles, because when the alert went out in Seychelles, they evacuated the city or the town, Victoria. But what happened was the managing director of the bank was very proactive, because he previously worked as the director general for the minister of finance. And what happened was he managed to get through the blockade that the police set up, purely because he knew people. And what he wanted to do was to protect the bank's assets. And for him, it was important to get down to the bank and make sure that he can move paper and computer systems. And they all moved it up to the first floor. And then staff came in and staff helped him to drive that. But he was the first one on site to get that done. And as they basically took some of the last stuff and moved it up to the first floor, the water came through. Now, it wasn't a tsunami in the sense that it washed away that building in Victoria. There were other places that were very, very badly damaged towards the airport. But ultimately, it was about half a meter of water that came through, but it was quite a strong surge. But still, what his actions directly led to the recovery of that bank, and they made a huge success of ensuring that the bank was protected.
Wow. And that's talk about going above and beyond, but it just demonstrates how much this is a human capability, as much as it is a technology thing, and you need the technology. But I think, the challenge is that you as an organization, you might have this beautiful resilience policy. It looks really impressive in a board pack, but it never really leaves the binder. And if you can't get that, if you can't make sure that the organizational culture understands the importance of what you're doing, well, then, it's a pretty pointless exercise. How do leaders practically embed that resilience into the culture of the organization? Because it's something that people have got to kind of live daily, I guess, and not just do a one-off training on risk management, and then by next week they've forgotten about it.
Yeah, Michael, a very good question around business culture, business continuity culture, and resilience culture in an organization. It does take time to embed these programs into an organization, and it's a critical part of the process to do that. And it's always the last item, if you look at the BCM life cycle, when you implement a business continuity program, is to do the training and the development of your business continuity program. But when you also test at a recovery facility and staff are not prepared and I don't know what to do, that is where you will have a failure in your BCM program, for instance. And that typically happens when there's for instance, a call center, and you have to recover the call center at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning because you had some cyber attack or whatever the case may be. And people have to move to a recovery facility, and they have to restart their work at a recovery facility. So for them, it's important to know that they have to have IDs with them. They have to be able to move to the recovery facility, and they have to be able to go to the desk and know what to do and to restart the call center, especially if it's a roadside assistance or a 24/7 medical aid or a ambulance service for that matter. That is absolutely critical that people know how to do that. And training of staff it's an ongoing thing because your company staff changes all the time. And you will always get people that are very enthusiastic about business continuity and some people that are absolutely not. It's just the way that it is. But still, training your staff is absolutely key in making sure that you can do that.
On a more personal note, I mean, how do you keep your own resilience sharp? Because I think, leading a business called Resilient Innovations probably comes with some inbuilt expectations that you've got to be pretty good at leading through crisis yourself. So how do you do that personally, building that culture inside your own organization?
Yeah, sure. It's not something that happens overnight. It does take time. I must say, to be a business leader, it's not something that you just come out of university and you all of a sudden CEO of a company and you can drive it. I mean, it does happen, but it does take a lot of work to be able to understand an organization, how to understand people, how to drive your business, how to make sure that the business can cope with a crisis when there's a cash flow issue or when there's people that get ill or fall away or whatever the case may be. So it's building that personal resilience does take time, and yes, and maybe a lot of effort to develop that. But ultimately, I think that as an example, um, I've seen leaders in crises that didn't do well or didn't perform well during a crisis, and specifically in African countries where we were operated quite a lot. And it's sometimes training again that comes back to it, makes to ensure that you can do that. It is also taking the guidance of other people over time and to embed that into yourself to make sure that you can deal with these crises. And I've led a few crises as well during my years of business continuity management, and I've seen it as well where we've done a simulation for a very large bank in South Africa and how difficult it is to do a simulation. And it's I've seen some people really very, very senior people in these simulations, all of them at board of directors, exco members. And when you get that pressure on you, you sweat. It's very difficult because you've got a room full of people, say 40, 50 people. You've got the media with you. You're doing a big training simulation, and you've got to understand how to be able to recover a bank, especially if there's a software outage, for argument's sake. And we've done one like that in this specific scenario. And when you think you can, it's pressure during a simulation. Wait until it really starts to happen with you, and you have the media standing outside your boardroom waiting for you to come out to try and understand what has happened to your bank. And again, it boils back to building the resilience in your organization so that it's not just by, oh gosh, we've gone into a crisis. Now we have to go into some form of recovery and to restart the organization at another place or the systems at another place like we did 20, 30 years ago. Now it's to build the resilience in your organization to be able to continue your operations without affecting it too much. And that is the trick. That's the challenge. And leadership, it's very, very important in such a situation.
Because, I mean, that reputational and brand damage can be fatal for an organization in a world where trust is everything with your clients, with your consumers, with your key stakeholders. And if you lose that through a crisis, very difficult to rebuild easily. So that the pressure is on, I think, for a reason, which shows that you've got a plan and you've got to plan carefully and methodically and really think very deeply about what business continuity management and resilience really means for your organization. If there's just one key nugget about resilience that you'd want every business leader watching today to remember, what would it be?
Yeah, that is a good point. I would say persistence in ensuring that you drive resilience in your organization and make sure that it does take place. It's not just a program that sits there and it's a board report at the end of the year. You've got to get actively involved in driving these programs and just being persistent from you as a leader, because it's a top-down approach in getting resilience and business continuity embedded in your organization. And you would hear a lot of organizations where leaders and CEOs talk about that in their organizations, which is fantastic, because the staff then take that proactively and follow through with that and look at BCM training programs, especially if there's an active program in place from the leadership and they see that the exco or the board takes it seriously and they want to make it happen. And again, it's not just going to happen. You don't do it once. You've got to do it over and over. That's how I'm saying persistence in ensuring resilience is embedded in your organization.
No, it's a muscle. You've got to keep on exercising it. If you don't, you may have a bit of muscle memory, but you certainly won't be able to flex that muscle nearly as effectively when the crisis really hits, or when the bovine excrement hits the rotating object, sometimes, as we say. Willem Olivier, thank you very much, CEO of Resilient Innovations, proving once again that resilience isn't about how many servers that you can replicate, but how many times you can bounce back without losing your cool and I think your sense of humor. If you've enjoyed this chat, you can find more leadership insights like this on businesstech.co.za.